it still seems to be an uphill battle to convince people of sort of maybe a post-millennial hope, to say that there is a future worth fighting for.
That is exactly right. And there's a hazard in it, because um, Christians, but basically if somebody becomes a Christian, one of the first things that happens is the cocaine bill goes way down. Um,
Let's hope.
Right. And then he gets married, becomes a responsible dad, and he's got to provide for his kids and so forth. And so this is true of every form of Bible believing Christian, whether they're post mill or amill or pre mill or dispensational, whatever. They live sober, decent, clean lives, which generally speaking is conducive to wealth acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If you went into an impoverished area in order to conduct evangelism, and your evangelism was very successful, and you established churches, and the people there were getting sober and getting cleaned up and getting married and doing this, one of the first things that's going to emerge from that is a middle class.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going to happen. And so that, regardless of eschatology, that's going to happen. The difficulty is if you're a dispensational pre-mill Christian, you're clean and sober and living a reasonable life, but you don't have a theology of advancing the kingdom, which would require funds, which would require donors, because you don't have a theology of that, and you believe that Jesus is coming back in 36 months, right?
Right.
You're not going to want to build a university to use for half of those 36 months. You're not going to want to build a multi-generational business. What you're going to do, it's going to cause you to shrink your vision, shrink your horizon, which then for 2 cents becomes selfish.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You circle the wagons tightly, and then it's just taking care of your family. Now, obviously, there's nothing wrong with taking care of your family, but I believe I'd like to quote Thomas Chalmers, the great Presbyterian, Scots Presbyterian pastor, who said, regardless of how large, your vision is too small.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. So I remember when you and I first spoke, I think it was in 2022, and I had just discovered post-millennialism, and it actually made a lot of sense to me. I'd never really explored the idea of eschatology very much, but it seemed to me, coming from the New Age, which also has sort of a premillennial kind of view, this idea that this new era is coming and the leap into hyperspace, these are real things. And so I had seen similar discussions, of course, in the Christian community from the outside, Left Behind series and something like that. It seemed the same projection of an apocalyptic vision. And it was through you that I discovered postmillennialism. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense to begin moving into the world with determination and focus, with a godly attitude. That seems to me to be a much more righteous way to live, rather than counting down the seconds until the apocalypse.
Right. As a famous pre-mill preacher once said, you don't polish brass on a sinking ship.
That's right. So just to go sort of off script for a second, I guess, it seems that there's perhaps a generational or a cultural divide. There's so many of them between Christians these days, and one of them is around the eschatological issue. How can and of course I've watched, I think it was your night of eschatology, that roundtable discussion, which I don't recall how long ago that was. What suggestions would you have, given that we have this 4-year window, which I think is a very real thing, to reaching out and building bridges with so many believers in America that just have this pre-mill kind of attitude, when we could really use them on board the builder mentality?
That is a very tough one.
Okay.
Because one of the features of pre-mill dispensational thinking is that the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And then if you look around, it's kind of sort of is.
Yes.
But people need to reflect that perhaps it is because we're thinking that way.
Right.
So which is the chicken and which is the egg? How is it possible for things to fall apart as drastically as they've fallen apart in the United States, when the United States is home to millions upon millions of evangelical Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what happened? Jesus says, what happens when the salt loses its saltiness, when the salt loses its savor? Jesus says it's only worth throwing out and being trampled on by men.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are times when the church is persecuted, the church is vibrant and it's persecuted because it's vibrant, but there are other eras where the church is persecuted because it's lame.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that we've invited a lot of this on ourselves by not taking the scriptures as seriously as we ought to have taken them.